Here we are. Good.
Welcome to Phil Margo, The Lion Roars, and you're hearing this on MalcolmPresents.com. Welcome, Phil. How you doing today?
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Yeah, well, I was thinking how much oddity there is in my life, Um, and in the last day I had uh, two grandsons, a nephew, and then two granddaughters, and my daughter were here because my nephew came in from New York. He's an attorney. He works for Clear, the company that does anyway. And I just sat there. I didn't even feel like talking. I just was listening to all of them talk to each other. All those people were there because of me,
Yeah,
except
well,
my wife, of course. But all those people were there. My daughter, her children, uh, uh, Ethan, I mean Jacob, and
Elon.
and 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 Elon is well, not because of me, but he's my DNA,
Yeah, he's Maxine's son.
the same day, right?
Maxine and Les. Yeah,
And I
well,
was
I
just
do a show with Maxine also, by the
right.
way, as you
I
know.
was yeah. It was just anyway. So I don't know where we were up to. Was I think
But just getting back to what you're saying, I know when my two sons are home and we're eating dinner, or they're with their friends or family, you think, yeah, their lives are completely not really connected to us anymore. I
right?
mean, we really have nothing to do. We brought them to a certain level, and now we really don't have anything to do with their lives. They have their own lives and their own circles, and you sort of sit back. Of course, if they're doing well, you sort of sit back and smile, like you say.
Yeah.
It's because of me.
Well, my I'm going to my son came with a surprise. I don't know if I showed you this last week. Maybe I showed you. I'm going by train to New York.
Yeah, you had mentioned that.
Told you
Well,
that.
that was on the phone. That wasn't.
All right. So anyway, so I found myself basically coming to California. We didn't sell our house. We were afraid to sell our house in New York, but we rented an apartment on Palm Drive, and I was working with Robert Guillaume.
Yeah, that's what I want to find out. I mean, you have, I mean, you're a music producer. You produce TV. You produce TV commercials. You had your rock and roll group, the Tokens. How the hell did you represent Robert Guillaume?
Well, that happened because we were working for Don Kirshner for a couple of years. We had a deal with him after the group split up.
Just by the way, Don Kirshner, I'm not sure. Was Don Kirshner the one that did the circus thing for kids, a circus show?
No,
No. Okay, that seems to.
rock concert. You're thinking of somebody else, Claude Kirshner.
Claude Kirshner. Okay.
How did I remember that? I
I
don't
don't know. I got the Kirshner right.
know. Anyway, and a friend of ours who wrote um, Denise, okay, and Let's Lock the Door and Throw Away the Key for Jay and the Americans. And he wrote Denise with Randy
Mhm.
Rainbow. And he actually brought us the group. And he has said he said that skateboarding was very popular, and he suggested we should do a skateboard album. Okay. Now I was almost finished with Kirshner. I had my deal was almost gone, and it wasn't going to get picked up. So we decided to do it. And Mitch and I wrote a bunch of songs, skateboard songs, and we got a group together. We called them Sneakers and Lace, and we did the album over a period of a few months. And we had a deal for it. Company put up the money and paid for it. And then and then they couldn't get anything happening with it. And I think either they gave it back to us or it went, I think it went to RCA or so. I don't know. I don't know exactly what happened, but the bottom line was because this skateboard album created interest in a company called Syndicast, which syndicated shows. And skateboarding was becoming very popular. This was in the middle 70s. This was like 76, 77. And so they said they would do a special based on the songs, and we had to get a host. We should find a host to host the show. So my wife was talking to her girlfriend, Lynn, about that on the phone. We lived in Suffern at the time, Suffern Park. And Lynn's daughter, Julie, heard that we were looking for a host, and she said, "Why don't you get Christy McNichol?" So
you
we
said,
did.
that's a great idea.
Contacted her. That's how weird my life is.
Mm.
I mean, my wife is on the phone with a friend of hers, and we have this skateboard possible syndicated show, and she hears the name, and she says, "Get." So we call Christy McNichol, and she's interested. She comes into New York, and while she's in New York, I had this idea. Maybe I have a friend at RCA, and I made an appointment to bring her up there, right? So I bring Christy McNichol up to RCA, and RCA, they were like kids, the men. They were standing around here getting autographs. I mean, the president of RCA is standing there getting Christy McNichol's autograph, right? So I walk out with an album deal. I say, well, let's do an album with her and her brother. They both sing. Well, how do they sing? They sing fine. I had no idea how they sang, right? So we get $125,000 to make this album, right? And we do it partially here, partially in New York, and partially here in California. And it turned out well, turned out really well. And because of it, the people at the Osmond Company, the Osmond brothers, and they produce all the television in their studios in Provo, Utah. They were assigned to do the cartoon promotion that they do on Saturday morning for that season's cartoon schedule, that they used to do on Saturday morning.
Yeah.
And they asked Jimmy and Christy to host the show. So we go out there, Mitch and I went out there, and we were there just to host the show. And Robert was doing a Donna Fargo show, which they were recording there. He was a guest because he was on Soap at the time. He had just started on Soap, and he made a splash on Soap. I mean, people.
He made a splash on Soap. Very good.
I know. I don't believe I said that. And so I got to talking to him because he thought I was representing Christy McNichol, which I wasn't. So I said, because he was looking for someone to handle him, the management, to be his associate, because he had just split up with somebody that he wasn't fond of. And I said, well, I'm not. I don't handle her. I'm not her manager. I only did this recording. He said, I know, but I like the way you handle yourself with them. You look like you know what's going on. So I said, all right. I mean, if you're sure you want to try this, he says, yeah. So he rented an office for us, that I could operate out of on Sunset Boulevard. And two things of note happened that made it work. One thing was a friend of mine who worked at NBC called me and asked me if I had any ideas for a movie for Gary Coleman. And I said, I don't know, I'll think about it. And I hung up. And then 2 minutes later, I called up. I said, I have an idea. There was this movie done in 1951 with Dan Daly called The Kid from Left Field, where a kid winds up being the manager of a Major League Baseball team, right? So she jumped up and she said, that's amazing. Wow. and then I don't hear from her at all, right? So I figured maybe she went to the upstairs people and nothing happened. So then now it's a couple of months later, and I get a phone call. She said, "Well, we're doing the movie." I said, "What movie?" She said, "The Kid from Left Field. We got the rights from Fox. Fox had the rights, and we're shooting the movie in San Diego." I said, "Okay. Is there anything in it for me since it was my idea, you know?" She says, "Well, what we're going to cast for the father." That was played by Dan Daly. She says, "So send Robert down." Okay. I said, "You want him to read something? Just send him down." So I say, "Robert, you have an appointment down in Central, in Culver City. They want to look at you for a movie." Okay. I didn't make a big deal out of it. About an hour later, he comes back. He said, "How did you do that?" I said, "How did I do what?" He said, "They offered me the part right there. They didn't even ask me to read." Don't forget, he's been a guy who's been reading all his life. He was never offered a part. I mean, even getting him on soap, Susan Harris had to threaten not to write the show because the network didn't want him or Catherine Hellman, you know, the two best
Yeah.
things in the show. The network didn't want them.
But by the way, listening to you, I have two scripts. I want you to represent me. I know you don't have no connections now, but I have the two scripts I'm going to give to you. Something's going to come up.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, you're under, you know, you do things, but you're under a, you know, the sun is always shining on you.
Well, or I find it. It's not always shining, believe me, but I find it somehow. So anyway, I tell Robert that, you know, you got the gig. You didn't have to read because they know you're on soap, and then you know you did the pilot for Benson, and they know me, and I gave him the idea.
Mm.
So he looked at me. He straightened up and looked at me and nodded his head, you know, like that was an answer to his instinct for choosing me. Okay. And then the next meeting I had with Paul and Tony was that I suggested that they do it. He didn't know. He didn't know he was on soap at the time. He didn't know about Benson at that time. That happened later. The show. I was I went to speak to Paul and Tony Thomas, and I suggested that they spin off Benson. And they started giving me, "Well, no, we can't lose him from soap. It's this and that and that." I said, "Well, he can still do soap. He can still come in and make appearances. You know, he doesn't have to be the butler every week, but he could do, you know, he's capable of doing both, you know, if you need it." So then they looked at each other and they said, "All right." And then they took out of his desk the pilot script for Benson.
Mm. How did you get into writing? Because you had mentioned on the last show that you did screenplays. Have you
Well,
ever done screenplays before?
no. The first, I think I told about Ball 4, right? About how I wound up getting paid for a story for Ball 4.
Yeah, Jim Bouton.
Yeah, with Jim Bouton. So that put me into Writers Guild, you know, because once you do something, you can join. You know what I mean? And I did it. I got paid for a script, for a story, you know.
How did you get that? How did you get that script? I mean, why did you why did you write a script? Who asked you to?
Well, it was, again, when Benson started, I would sit in a room with the current executive vice president of current programming, right? And we would sit in the green room and watch the show, you know, being taped, Benson. And one day we had this idea. Don Siegel saw a show that had a girl on it who was a part-time wife, surrogate wife. She went to Jack, I forgot his name now, one of the stars of the Seattle Supersonics, is it? They were a basketball team, right?
Yeah, I forget where they moved to.
Yeah, and he needed a part-time wife to do his shopping, to help get his apartment. You know, he had this beautiful apartment, no furniture in it, no dinners, no nothing. And she would, her name was Terrell Gavry. She would be his wife, except for the bedroom. You know,
Yeah,
she
you
would
had mentioned, yeah.
stuff. She would do, she would make sure his clothes were clean. She would, make sure the house was clean, all of that stuff. And she charged a fee. So we thought that would be a great idea for a movie. So I went. So I was in the room with this executive in the green room, and I mentioned that. So he said, "I'll tell you who to call. Call so and so next week, because we taped on Fridays, I think." So I called the executive in charge of movies of the week, and he set up an appointment. And I came in and I pitched the idea, and they put it in development. And because when it comes in from the top, they generally do it. You know what I mean? It's not that I'm coming on from the bottom asking them, "Oh, give me a break." This came in from a vice president, So they ordered a script. They had two women writers writing a script, or one woman, I don't remember how much. And because it was about a woman, and they thought a woman should write it. And the first script came in, it sucked. The second script came in, it sucked. So they were going to drop the project. And we came to them and said, "Look, let us write a story, pay us minimum. If the story goes to script, pay us regular price, and we'll write the script. If the script doesn't go, then just pay us minimum. If the script goes, then pay us what we deserve. So we took the script and we wrote a piece called "This Wife for Hire." And remember this gun for hire? That was "This Wife for Hire."
Paladin.
And we returned it.
Richard Boone, yeah.
No, "This Gun for Hire" was a movie.
No, that was it. Alan Ladd.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, Paladin was the name of the.
Anyway, so we write the script, and we did heavy research. We found out that at that time, this was in 1980 something, that if a wife were paid a salary for the work she did, as a raising children, as a psychologist, all of the things that women do, added up to $50,000 a year if they got paid for it.
Back then.
Yeah, this was back in the 80s.
80s.
So I figured, so we used that line in the show because it was relevant. And she says, "You're telling me, and anyway, so she starts this company called Part-Time Wives or some Wives for Hire, whatever. And she starts with a basketball player like Terrell did, with a star basketball player who was in the same, but it was the whatchamacallit. Come on, not the Lakers, the
Seattle.
The team that just made the playoffs again, the California team.
The Clippers.
Clippers, right? Clippers. My brain is so. Anyway, the California Clippers, and we shot it at the Clippers,
at
the stadium, and we had We didn't use a make believe. We didn't use a make believe uniform. We used and I wrote a script with Don Siegel that got made.
Got made.
And that's how it started. I mean, that's what started me. Then we went on to do I did a Love Boat. I did the last Love Boat. That was with the original cast.
He just passed away.
Yes, I know.
Darren McGavin.
Right.
Not Darren McGavin.
No, Captain Stubing.
The Captain Stubing. Now I'm doing a Claude, but anyway.
Right.
But it reminds me of when you said you did a script in development. There's a book called Only You, Dick Daring. I don't know if you read that.
Yeah, I
It's a
remember.
book of the '80s,
I remember.
and it's about. Actually, it was about James Aubrey, who was head of CBS.
Yes,
It's
right.
this writer, and Aubrey comes up to the writer and says, "I have an idea for a show. It's Jackie Cooper with a pickup truck on a dusty road. Write it." So the writer does a script for him, and they said, "No, I love your script, but there's only one thing changed." And this continued for about 3 years.
Right.
And finally, Aubrey, left CBS, and the script was never done. But they spent, untold amount of money on developing it. So the writer was saying, he said, "It's not how many scripts you have; it's how many scripts you have in development."
Right.
Talking about in
Sure.
development.
Once
But
you're in development, you pay.
but anyway, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. So you just attempted this without ever doing it. Did you study? Did you look what scripts consist of?
I never studied any of the things that I did ever. I never studied music. I mean, I learned music, but I never got deep into the heart of music. I never studied writing. I just had, I just wrote, practically everything I did in my life, I didn't really, and I'm not saying that as a positive, it's a negative. I guess because when you dedicate yourself to one thing, you remain that one thing generally, or maybe you do something else at some point. But had a chance to do everything. I had a chance to stand on a stage in front of 40,000 people and sing. I had a chance to write stuff that people watched. Most of my movies that I wrote did well. I did Goddess of Love. After that, I did Goddess of Love with oh Jesus, I don't know what's happening to my brain lately. With the letter
I,
turner girl.
I know what's happening, but we won't get into that
I don't
because
even want to talk about it.
I have the same
Anyway,
problem.
but anyway, we did Goddess of Love, which tied War and Remembrance with Robert Mitchum.
That was a great movie.
Right, and it tied it for the
Really?
night. And yes, by the end of the night, we were tied with them.
I'm forgetting who wrote that. There was War and Remembrance, and then there was a book before that or after that. I forget which one it was, but when's a sequel?
It was the second one.
War and Remembrance.
Yeah, it was the second War and
Yeah.
Remembrance, not the first. War and Remembrance was the first one, I believe. But we were up against the second one,
Yeah.
which was way ahead in the first quarter, first half hour, and then Goddess of Love.
Overtook it. Amazing. What you did, which actually they have courses now in colleges, or they did, do things intuitively. Listen to your intuition and follow it.
It's just, I was fascinated by Ava Gardner when she did the movie um, uh,
One Touch of
Venus,
Venus.
One Touch of Venus, right?
Yeah.
And
Robert Walker Jr.
Right, and I just was just filled with her beauty. I mean, she was just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
You and
And
about 4 million other men, including Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, and I was a kid, right? And I was a kid then, and I was always fascinated by the story, and I always thought the story should be redone because it was a play first, a musical, and then it became a movie, but then it was never done again. So when I came out to California, I had my accountant had an office in London, and I did the research and found out that it was based on a book called The Tinted Venus, which was written by F. Anstey, Thomas Guthrie Anstey, but he used the name F. Anstey because he wrote The Talking Horse, Vice Versa, which was when people switched bodies, The Tinted Venus, which was when Venus comes alive. So he wrote all of those stories in the 1800s. You know, those similar to what Jules Verne did with science fiction. You know, he did these personal science, you know, stories, right? You know, a goddess turning to a statue of a goddess turning to life, people changing personalities. I mean, he did that. Thomas Guthrie Anstey. And so somebody in the office in London, in my accountant's office in London, went to a bookstore that had antique books and found the book. I have the book.
Wow.
Wait,
I'm waiting.
don't go away. I'm going to show it to you. I hate to get up, but
Okay. Are you there? Paging. Wow.
this is the book. Look at the pages. Look.
Oh, I think you should take that to the Antique Roadshow.
Tinted Venus. See? So, and I carried this book around with me for 10 years. Okay?
Not
10
knowing
years.
not knowing what you wanted to do with it.
Oh, trying to pitch it,
Hmm.
trying to sell it to different places. And everybody said, nah, nah, nah. Finally, I called up a friend of mine, Tony Masucci, at NBC, and I said, I got this. Are you looking for a fantasy sitcom? He said, yeah. Well, we're looking for something like that.
The timing was right.
And I brought it in, and bam, it got made. It got made, and it's still, you can still see it on Amazon. If you go to Amazon and write Goddess of Love, Vanna White was the star.
Vanna White?
Yes.
This was before she was Vanna White, right?
No.
No, I mean, was she on Wheel of Fortune?
On the show, and that was an interesting story too. We could have gotten Bo Derek to play Venus. Okay.
Okay, I know who my favorite is.
We could have gotten 10. Bo Derek. She wanted to do it. And NBC wanted Vanna White. So they agreed to screen test her. And after the screen test, we still wanted Bo Derek. And they said, no, you have to use Vanna White. And I said, I'm turning down the order, right?
Yeah.
Imagine the cubes on telling a network, I don't want a green light. I don't know whoever did that. I don't know of any, but I'm sure some people did that. It didn't matter to, you know, if some rich producer who had 35 movies, you know, to me, each movie was important.
Yeah,
but
well, the one who did that, what I think about turning down offers, Sylvester Stallone, when they wanted to take Rocky, but they didn't want him to star in it, and he said, "Forget about it. If I'm not going to play Rocky, that's me.
Right.
Forget about the movie."
So, bless his heart. So I wanted to. I turned it down. I said, "No, I'm not making the movie. You want me to use Vanna? She's adorable. I adore her. She's a nice person. She was so caring and delightful when we did the screen test, which I still have, by the way. But I said I don't want to do it. But the problem was I was in business with New World, who were my partners. So I couldn't turn it down. I didn't have the right to turn it down. Okay. So.
By the way, do you have a screen test of Bo Derek for it?
Of what?
Did they ever screen test Bo Derek for the role?
No, they wouldn't have screen tested her. They didn't need a screen test her. Could she play Venus in a minute? But
yeah.
So I agreed to make the movie. I was furious about the way they did it, but I agreed. I agreed. And once we got the green light, they sold the put to another company, New World. They sold it for $250,000. And my accountant, my lawyer said, well, that's a profit to them, right? I said, yeah. He said, well, you get half the profits. So we wrote him a legal letter saying you owe us 125. Half of that is ours. And they paid us.
Wow.
Actually, they paid us 95 because they said there was some bullshit. I didn't want to fight. You know, you don't want to go to court to win that much money. I already won 95 grand. Yay.
Right.
And they paid me, and that was that. And the movie is still around. It's on Amazon. It's enjoyable. She's, you know, she was delightful on the set. She brought cookies for people. She was on time. She knew her lines. You know,
Sweet lady.
she just didn't have the acting experience. We needed the Venus to speak like in an English way, you know, to use that kind of hello, you know, that kind of, and she just couldn't, you
Mhm.
know, she couldn't do it the way. But the movie was successful, and it's still around, and you can still watch it on Amazon.
You still get residuals for it?
I get residuals, but I don't get. See, I got one profit check, like in the early 2000s, and then I haven't. Then now it's in deficit, they say, but I'm not going to. You know, I get statements. I do get statements. Finally.
Well, you're familiar with the Art Buchwald when he's
Yeah, with the movie, yeah.
yeah, and basically, you know, they said the most creative writers in Hollywood are the CPAs, the accountants.
Yeah, well, you can't. The problem with this whole industry is that if someone steals from you, you can only get back what they stole. There's no punitive,
Mm.
and there's no collecting legal fees.
Mm.
So if they rob $10,000 from me, it's going to cost 25 for $30,000 to get it back. It's just not worth the fight.
Right. Yeah.
They're just oriented to screw people. The
Yeah.
record companies too.
Yeah, but they were talking about that. Yeah, if you make a movie deal, never take the net profits. Always go for the gross.
Yes.
Because there's never, no matter how much a movie makes, there's never a net profit.
The death. Yes.
Anyway, under that note, as you heard, the time went out.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was. It was. I didn't. The movie was very successful.
And we'll pick up your.
And then Brandon Tartikoff put his hand on a Bible and said, "I'll never do another Vanna White movie," because the critics, you know, knew that she wasn't a terrific actress, and I was ready to do. I had another movie for her. I would have done another movie because I would have done a movie that she could have played. But they didn't want to. I wanted her to be a detective.
Was she doing Wheel of Fortune?
Yeah. He's still doing Wheel of Fortune.
Wait, was Brian Tartikoff at ABC at the time?
NBC.
No, didn't
Brandon
he go
Tartikoff.
over to ABC after?
No.
I thought Tartikoff went to ABC.
No.
I might be wrong. Okay.
No, he kind of left the business. He kind of left, and he never went back.
Oh.
His wife and daughter were in an accident, and he left the network.
No, because he was the behind some of the best shows on television.
Yeah, he was
before he left. But anyway, let's start you know, from this portion of your life.
Okay.
And see where you go from there. So far, you've been a successful rock singer with a group, with your own group, the Tokens. You've been a successful advertising man
And producer, the Chiffon.
And a record producer. And now you're a successful manager and a successful writer.
Yep.
Where does Phil Margo go from here? Stay tuned next week, only on Phil Margo, The Lion Roars, heard exclusively on MalcolmPresents.com. Speak to you later, kid.
Thank you. Pleasure.